The broadcast clock read 4 minutes when Inquisitor Marshal V. Asan handed me the script and told me to read it like I believed it. I had translated for the Having Doctrinal Synod for 6 years by then, longer than any other human attached to the ministry, and I knew the shape of a testimony session before I read a word of it. The broadcast hall was built like a throat, narrow at the booth, widening into tiered galleries packed with war priests in their gray vestments. Banners of the Ninth Verge Fleet hung from the dome on chains thick as my arm. Every channel in Having space would be open in 4 minutes. Workers in the orbital yards, conscripts on troop transports, the old and the sick in the Crown World wards, all of them tuning in to hear how the Thresh line had been saved. The script said the Ninth Verge Fleet broke a siege at the Thresh line 11 days ago, arrived at the last hour, pulled the human defense line back from collapse. 20 lines of high doctrine. My voice, reading it, because a human voice reading Having victory was worth more to them than any of their own. It was not true. I had pulled the actual relay dispatch off an uncleared terminal an hour earlier, the one nobody had thought to lock me out of, because nobody imagined the translator read anything but what she was handed. The dispatch said the Ninth Verge Fleet had never reached the Thresh line, not within 4 light days of it. I understood why the lie existed before I understood what it was hiding. The Synod needed the Ninth Verge Fleet to have saved the line, because in 3 days they were opening a new conscription cycle, and a story of having steel arriving in time plays better to frightened recruits than a story of humans holding alone. Again, the way the line had held alone for 2 years running. A myth was being built to fill troop transports. I was the voice they'd chosen to build it in, because a human telling other species that having saved humanity carried weight no having priest's own voice ever could. Asan watched me fold the script into my coat. He mistook it for nerves. "Read it clean," he said. "Let them hear gratitude in it." I told him I would. The feed opened with a tone like a held breath, and the galleries went silent the way they always did, a silence built on certainty, the kind that doesn't expect to be interrupted. I looked at the script in my coat pocket and did not take it out. "This is the testimony of the Thresh line," I said, in their tongue, flat and even, the way I'd been trained to read anything. 11 days ago, the human defense at the Thresh line held against a sustained assault with no reinforcement from any Having vessel. The line was not broken. The line did not require saving. Somewhere in the 3rd tier, a priest commander rose halfway out of his seat and sat back down, as if his body had started to object before his mind agreed to it. I kept going. I gave them the dispatch numbers, the timestamps, the position logs of the Ninth Verge Fleet for the 11 days in question, coordinates that put it nowhere near the front, moving instead along a slow arc toward the Crown World's inner systems. I read the casualty count the Synod's own script had omitted, the one belonging to the human defenders who held without help. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain why I was doing it. There is nothing to explain that the numbers don't already say better than I could. Asan's hand closed on my shoulder. Too late. The feed had been live for 90 seconds, and a testimony session, once opened, cannot be closed without every relay station in Having space knowing it was cut. "Where," I said, reading the last line of the dispatch as written, not as scripted, "was the Ninth Verge Fleet during those 11 days?" I had not meant it as a question to the room. It was the dispatch's own closing line, a note left by whoever filed it, half rhetorical. But 300 priests in gray vestments heard it as one, and for a long moment nobody in the gallery answered, because nobody in the gallery actually knew. That was when the recall officer in the 2nd tier, I never learned her name, only her rank insignia, a junior logistics warden, stood up without being asked to and said the thing that ended the session. "The Ninth Verge Fleet was recalled to the Ashgar yards 11 days ago," she said, and her voice cracked on the word recalled in a way that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the sound of a career ending in real time. Crown World Security designated it a quarantine action. I filed the manifest myself. The hall did not go silent this time. It went loud in the worst way. 100 low voices all asking the same question of each other at once, because everyone understood what a quarantine action at the Ashgar Yards meant, and none of them wanted to be the one who said it on an open channel. A record scribe 2 rows behind the logistics warden, younger than her, his voice thinner, stood without anyone telling him to and read his own terminal aloud, as if the room had become a place where reading the truth out loud was simply what one did now. 41 casualties at the Ashgar Yards in the suppression action, he said. Workers, not soldiers. The number had been logged under a maintenance heading so it would never have to appear beside the word rebellion in any report that left the system. I said it instead, because somebody had to, and the dispatch had already done the work for me. The Ashgar Yards have been in open labor revolt for 16 days, I said. The 9th Verge Fleet wasn't holding a line at the front. It was holding a line at home. Asan's hand was still on my shoulder. I felt it shake before I heard anything from him. A senior priest near the dais, robes the deep red that marked him as close to the Synod's inner ring, came halfway to his feet and said the words that would be quoted on every relay for a season afterward, though none of the Synod's own historians would ever admit where the quote came from. That fleet was supposed to be at the front. Tell me it was at the front. Nobody told him that. The numbers had already told everyone the opposite, live, on a channel the Synod itself had insisted on opening to every world it governed. I set the dispatch down on the booth rail, where the cameras could see it if they wanted to, and I did not pick the script back up. There was nothing left in it worth reading. A lie only works once it's said. This one had been said correctly, by their own officer, in their own words, in front of their own people, and there is no version of a doctrinal synod that survives correcting itself live in front of 300 million listeners. The feed ran for another 40 seconds of pure noise before someone in the control gallery finally found the nerve to cut it. By then it didn't matter. It had already gone out. Asan did not speak to me again that day. 2 officers walked me back to the human liaison wing without a word, which I understood by then to be the closest thing to an apology the doctrinal synod was capable of giving silence, instead of the punishment a translator who improvises usually earns. They held an inquiry 11 days later, the same span as the deception itself, as if the number meant something to them beyond coincidence. I was not called to testify. I had already said everything I knew how to say once on a channel that couldn't be taken back. The Thresh line held on its own that month, and the month after, the way it always had. The 9th Verge Fleet was reassigned to garrison duty at the Ashgar Yards under a new name, because the Synod could not bring itself to keep the old one. Ve Asan was reassigned somewhere I never heard of and was never spoken of again in my hearing. The conscription cycle the lie had been built to fill went forward 3 days later as scheduled, but the recruiting numbers for having volunteers fell by more than half, while the Thresh line's own human enlistment held steady without a single ship from the Synod behind it. Nobody at the ministry ever told me that connection out loud. They didn't need to. I'd read enough recruitment ledgers by then to do the arithmetic myself. I kept my post. I read what they handed me, and when it was true, I read it exactly as written. When it wasn't, I had already shown them what I'd do, and they never tested me on it twice. That was the only part of the story that ever mattered to me. Not that I'd embarrassed a synod of war priests on an open channel, but that the line at the Thresh held without a single ship that wasn't ours, and somewhere in the Crown World wards, an old woman who'd been told her grandson died waiting for rescue learned, in my voice, that he hadn't waited for anything at all. I never raised my voice once. I never had to. The truth, read plainly, did all the work a shout never could.